I think most would agree that Limbus is a very interesting game. It rarely follows the conventions set by its genre, both to its benefit and detriment. When an opportunity to get more money from players presents itself, PM capitalize on it rather half-heartedly. The facade system is one such example. Rather than sell paid skins, it makes you grind even more. On one hand, thank goodness they're not preying on our wallets. On the other, we have to play more mirror dungeons and skip moral excavations. Yippee! This problem is even more exacerbated by the recently released Threadspin V for one of Ryoshu's egos, 4th Match Flame. Now, I'm not gonna cover whether it's worth it to Threadspin 4th Match Flame specifically. I've talked about the ego in one of my shorts already, go check it out if you like bad impressions of AI voices. The two things I want to discuss now are spin chains and how unnecessary this whole thing feels. First, spin chains are a new resource that, for now, is used only to threadspin egos to tier 5. For a He ego, you'll need 175 spin chains. The main way of getting them is through converting your other resources. Matching ego shards and universal shards have a 1-to-1 conversion ratio, meaning you'll either need 175 universal shards or Ryoshu ego shards specifically. Thread and non-matching ego shards have a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning you'll have to spend 350 thread or 350 ego shards if you're a maniac and hate yourself. This resource may also potentially be rewarded through future content. That concludes the necessary preamble. While I'm not a game designer or anything, I believe spin chains are ultimately unnecessary. When introducing new resources into a gacha game, the developers have to answer a series of questions. 1. What content can this resource be used in? 2. What are the ways of acquiring this resource? And 3. Can this resource be replaced by another already existing resource or mechanic? The answers to these 3 questions will determine how much of a clusterfuck your gacha will be when it comes to resource bloat and currency obfuscation. When we take a closer look at spin chains, then it becomes questionable whether this resource needs to exist to begin with. Right now, they only exist for Threadspin V, which is available only to egos. There's no telling if spin chains will be useful for something like Uptime 5, but speculating about future additions will lead us nowhere. Egos in and of themselves are already a niche piece of our arsenal. Most of your thread and ego shard budget goes towards IDs, which are more necessary for most, if not all, gameplay scenarios, since they offer a much bigger impact on your team's overall performance. Ego shards in particular are a big bottleneck that determines whether you can upgrade your units, as well as ignore the gacha and guarantee the acquisition of that shiny new ID on the banner. This leads us back to thread spinning. Guess what comes before 5? Most players already can't justify the ego shard cost of a lot of egos. You need to spend 450 of those on a single 000 ID just to get it and have it be functional in modern content. And it usually works out of the box. While with egos you have to actually strategize and worry about SP cost, ego resources, risk of corrosion, whether to overclock or not, and it doesn't even matter in most contexts. Win rate blast. In some cases, a team has 1, maybe 2 key egos that are truly essential. You may even have some generalist stuff at Threadspin 4 that is blatantly better than most options. But do players even have the luxury to spend the equivalent of 2 Uptime 4s on an ego that's gonna bring comparatively less value? Quick interruption. I'm very close to 10,000 subscribers. If you like the content I've been producing, then I would really appreciate your help in clicking the subscribe icon. Other buttons also help this channel grow, but I'm not gonna ask you to click them as well. You gotta press like when you actually like a video, you know? Thank you. Let's talk about the second question. How do you get spin chains? Well, you have several options when threadspinning a He class ego. First, 350 non-matching ego shards. This is the same as straight up converting them at the thread exchange. Absolutely psychotic behavior. Second, 350 threads. This is the real cost for most players. Thread is one of the resources that regular players have an abundance of. Triple skipping a level 60 thread excavation with the daily bonus grants you 54 thread. A week of farming in this way will easily afford you a Threadspin 5 for a He ego. That's why the real cost for such players are the ego shards. This does encourage daily play, considering other thread sinks like the facade system. I personally don't play Limbus daily, so I'm always at a thread deficit in such scenarios. Don't know if it's just a me issue, but it still feels unpleasant. Third, 175 of universal or matching ego shards. This is still a ripoff, but may be useful in niche scenarios, like if you have the Limbus pass and have used up all your daily excavation bonuses, you have the option of farming ego shard crates from the mirror dungeon. Absolutely not worth it in my opinion, but you do you. What we've come to is that 3 out of the 4 ways of converting resources into spin chains are not even worth it, and the most optimal way is spending that 350 thread. So this begs the question, why do spin chains exist? The cost boils down to just thread, and spin chains are restrictive by design, only being used in Threadspin V as of now. Why can't the upgrade just straight up cost thread? If you were to potentially receive spin chains as a reward for a game mode or event, then it would be equivalent to getting thread that can't be used for most things in the game. The whole resource is just a worse thread at this point. Another recently added resource, Threadskin, has a similar issue. Chances are you're not wasting ego shards on skins when you can use thread. Same criticisms apply here, though the whole problem is less severe since facades have minimal impact on the gameplay and balancing. While the issue is nothing catastrophic by itself, it does show how Project Moon fundamentally misunderstands the concept of adding new, useful resources. Right now, spin chains and thread schemes offer a choice that has an objectively correct answer, invalidating their existence. They only serve as obfuscation layers, masking the actual price of their respective content. I'm sure it was unintended by Project Moon and they just wanted to offer players a freedom to choose, but good intentions can't be an excuse for poor implementation. One of the things I would suggest, besides just replacing these resources with thread, is removing the thread conversion outright and making them an exclusive reward for certain renewable content. Like a reward with a daily or weekly limit that gives a player more reason to play a certain game mode. That game mode would have to be enjoyable and repeatable, with different iterations and sufficient player freedom so that people are not bored of it in 2 seconds and "What are you doing here? Get out!" I'm talking about a new game mode. I'm sure PM will come up with a good one eventually. Anyway, I've rambled long enough about stuff that doesn't really matter much. Another issue I have with Threadspin V is that it's not something that we need. Sure, people want powerful IDs and egos and buffs for their favorite toys. We're getting more and more tools that demolish the existing content with little to no resistance. Like, remember how Mirror Dungeon Extreme was supposed to be actually hard? Remember how Refraction Railway was once considered difficult endgame content? Now we have Refractorial and it's already becoming a joke. Point is, we're too powerful for the content that is being offered. Threadspin V raises the power of egos, but do you really need that? Threadspin 4 is already a luxury, so is this. The game is just too easy to require additional player boosts, especially when they get applied to stuff that was already pretty good. Add in the fact that most players just smash the win rate button and call it a day, and you start to realize that we're playing with nuclear warheads in the playground that only has a tiny slide and a seesaw. At this point, I'm convinced the only point of Threadspin V is to see numbers go up, just piling more and more damage when the enemy is already dead. This is very much apparent with how 4th Match Flame behaves as an example. And this is a problem that's unique to egos. It's equipment that you can use with any identity, no matter how weak or strong it is. It will always be a tool that will be able to not only help out a struggling ID, but also buff up an already monstrous identity that didn't really need all that. Alright, let's back up. I'll try to explain this more visually. Imagine the power level of a sinner as a line. Their weakest identity is at the start of the line, while their strongest is at the end. When you buff or nerf a specific identity, it moves along this line. However, if a sinner's ego gets buffed, then it affects the whole line, moving it forward. The most prominent example of this would be Mirceau and his Regret ego passive. Now, imagine there's an area of appropriate difficulty. It covers a certain section of the line. If something is in this area, then that piece of content is properly balanced to give the player an adequate amount of challenge, while not being impossible. If something is to the left of this area, it's underpowered. If it's to the right, it's overpowered. Ideally, a developer's goal would be having as many things in this area as possible. Every piece of content would be usable, but no one thing should invalidate the entire game's difficulty. Any normal developer would add something into the game, see if it matches the intended difficulty, release it, and if a mistake happens, they buff or nerf it accordingly. However, Project Moon doesn't have such flexibility, so when they release an overpowered identity, it just kind of has to sit there until the game's difficulty catches up to it, leaving other identities in the dust. That's power creep in a nutshell. And Threadspin V doesn't solve the issue, it arguably makes it worse. Here's what 4th Match Flame did to every Ryoshu identity. First, since it is equipable by every Ryoshu, it made her whole line go forward, making every identity stronger. This would be fine if her ego selection was poor and she had to catch up to other sinners. However, Ryoshu has one of the best ego rosters in the game, so this just makes her win more. Second, 4th Match Flame has a passive that synergizes extremely well with identities that can use multiple skills in a turn. Those tend to be stronger than average, so they move further away along the line, invalidating weaker choices even more. And then 4th Match Flame has even more synergy with one of the strongest identities in the game, not to mention indirectly buffing other egos that were already some of the best ones you could use, meaning Ryoshu's strongest choose just zip past the intended difficulty area, after which PM will have to inevitably adjust the difficulty and make weaker identities on all sinners even weaker in comparison. This will get worse and worse with each and every Threadspin V ego. But, you know, game balance doesn't matter. We're playing Mirror Dungeon anyway, and the difficulty in that abomination is out of whack all the time. Just play the game, don't look at rampant power creep, don't look at the lack of meaningfully challenging content, just roll for new shiny identities, and be happy. It gets tiring having a bazooka in a kid's playground and just pressing P enter all the time. Threadspin 5 is not something that we need. It's nice that it gives us more options to play with, but it comes to a point. Maybe I will be more charitable when PM decides to give the upgrade to a struggling ego and not to an already established powerhouse, just to make their new identity even stronger. But for now, enjoy your new toys. Maybe someday there will come a time when spending copious amounts of resources might be worthwhile to overcome an actual challenge in this. We'll see. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.